Hi, guys. It's Mark Stoos with Accelerating Value, your weekly podcast that focuses entirely on what it takes to create value, to invest in it, to defend it, to prove it. How do you even think about it? You know, if you're a leader, you probably have a certain perspective on it. If you're someone further down the organization, you might have a little bit of a different perspective. And if you're a consultant or an agency or somebody like that, you're going to yet again have a different perspective. And it's so it is very much where you sit determines where you stand. And yet there are absolutes about value, right? Value in the end monetizes for somebody somewhere. Otherwise, it's not value. So we talk about this with lots and lots and lots of different kinds of people, different CHROs and CMOs and CROs and CEOs and CFOs and all kinds of folks, right? Getting ready to interview a major cleric of all things, right? Who is both the CEO of his religion in the United States, but also a priest, right? And talk about that kind of value. So today, this is like really cool for me, right? Because I have known Jennifer Brenner for a very long time, probably longer than either one of us would really like to specify. And she is now the CMO of a company called Island. And some of you, if you're into cybersecurity and all that kind of stuff, you know Island. They deliver value in kind of two major ways, I guess you could say. Upside, which of course everyone gets excited about, and also they really help you mitigate the downside risk associated with being online, which is a whole different kind of value, right? And you can say, well, how do I prove the value of something that didn't happen? Well, I think she probably has an answer for you for that. So, Jen, glad to have you.
Thank you. Glad to be here and always good to connect with you again.
Absolutely. So let's talk about value here, and we'll start from the point of view of risk, because the two are inextricably bound up together, right, in many, many, many instances. And also, in your particular case, you're really helping customers deal with that issue, right? It's sort of like you're a pain reliever that converts to a vitamin, right? So talk about that. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that, because that's not only a practicality, that's a philosophical, that's a true point of view on your customer. That's the understanding of your customer. So let's start there.
Yeah, I think that it's been really wonderful for me to be in the business of disaster recovery as a service, helping people to prepare for things like ransomware attacks, and on all of these things in a time period in our culture where this is such an issue, right? There are attacks coming from kind of all sides of the spectrum. And so being able to...
Colonial.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And being able to work with our customers, to help them to mitigate those risks is really important, especially when you're talking about online and how much of everyone's business is conducted online these days. So it's a wonderful perspective to have and to be able to hear people feel their pain and help them to prepare. And in cases where something happens, something unforeseen, a major risk, to be able to be there and to solve those problems is actually really satisfying. I know when I say that, I speak for everyone at Island. We really love being able to either protect people in the first place so that something never happens, or when the unthinkable does happen, being able to come in and get businesses back up and running. But like I said, right, it's a mirror to our current culture where people are just, I feel like we're sort of going from like one thing to the next in terms of attacks and issues and major catastrophes, and knowing how to like be resilient, both inside of yourself, inside of your business, and inside of your teams. So that's that perspective of having that be a major component of our business. I mean, we also do, just regular infrastructure as a service, cloud. But within that, there's a specialty called disaster recovery as a service, where we're helping people to back up their business assets and have disaster recovery plans in the cloud, which is a great place to be when you're in trouble.
No, absolutely. So you're kind of combining fire prevention with
Yep.
firefighting,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
And how do you, I mean, this is not a new question, right, at all, but how do you prove a negative? In other words, in this case, how do you prove the value of the fact that you were able to prevent something from happening?
Well, kind of like I said, think about the way that our cultures change, and maybe it's that we always were surfing from one catastrophe to the next as a society, but now we just have the means to report on everything and anything. So now we know, or we're more aware of all of the risks. Ransomware and cyber attacks, which is one example of a catastrophe that could happen in a business's life. That's a fairly new concept, but people stealing from you is not a new concept, right? It's just Watergate online. And catastrophes have always happened, but our ability to deal with them and where they happen has changed. And our knowledge of them and our awareness of them has changed, right? We have instant access to information. The voices, the people that are able to report what's happening has changed. So many more people have platforms and voices to get things to the surface. But from a, business perspective, there's a whole new sort of gamut. And in our business, it runs from like the new world of cybersecurity all the way back to the old world of what do you do if you're in a city that's hit by a hurricane and you're backing up all your data onto like disk when you really should have been in a data center, and maybe you have a data center on each side of the country and those sorts of things. So it's all the way from, biblical level catastrophes to current day sort of cybersecurity and issues of things that happen online that are problems. But of course, right, like the biggest goal and the most important thing, regardless of the type of thing that you're in, is to keep companies moving forward. So I feel like it's maybe not so hard to prove the value of it in today's culture because there's just so much visibility. And so, to sit down with customers and say, look, there could be a huge weather event, or there could be you could be attacked by cyber criminals. Like, it doesn't take people, it's not hard for people to imagine those scenarios, or in the alternate, to know someone within their realm of associates that's been touched by them. Right. So,
Yeah. And I think too, there's been unfortunately so many of those kinds of events where the costs are now very, very well understood.
absolutely.
Right. And also from an actuarial point of view, the likelihood of it happening is also pretty well understood.
Absolutely.
When you and I were at BMC Software, right, this was a while ago, one of the things that they were just starting to bring out at that time was they had been able to sense when a server was going to fail and warn you, right?
Yeah.
But then they got to the point where not only could they sense it and warn you, but they could actually take automatic steps to prevent it from failing, right? And the value of that was kind of exponential relative to everything else. And that was even before a lot of AI got into the mix. Are you seeing a lot of AI coming into your offering? Maybe it already is in your offering. How's that kind of working in terms of the overall approach?
Yeah, so I feel like definitely people are employing artificial intelligence in their solutions, and we're providing the infrastructure and the alternate. We're using disaster recovery to make sure that all of their information and all of these edge technologies are backed up and ready to go. So it's about the power behind it, the horsepower behind it. But definitely it matters. And one of the things you said that I thought was interesting is you're talking about how in the old days, right, they would alert you to a server or some kind of issue. In the current climate, we're talking about businesses that need to fail back and recover their systems in seconds and minutes, right? As in the old days where you were talking about hours and days before they could get people back online. And of course, what you were talking about is just actually explaining the advantage of the cloud, right? Because you never have to be in that situation where you're worried about a server because someone else is monitoring and taking care of that server and making sure that your data and your applications are really, really safe and secure and accessible.
Absolutely. So where do you see the issue of risk going into the future for your customers? Like when you talk to them and they say, "Hey, this is awesome, but we're kind of already having these kinds of thoughts about these kinds of risks." What does that look like? Where's that going?
Well, I think that they're just, going to go further and deeper into planning, right? Further and deeper into what are our disaster recovery plans? Let's be sophisticated about them. How are we backing up our data and applications? Let's be sophisticated about that. Let's be thoughtful because it's like you said now, whereas before, 20 years ago, they were like, well, maybe something will happen, or maybe there was a lot of, maybe the IT people thought, well, the servers are within my reach, so I'm good. The data's within my reach, so I'm good. But now, as organizations have evolved just enormously over the past 20 years in terms of the sophistication of both the applications within their company and their reliance on the cloud to run their businesses, it's increasingly about having a more sophisticated and deeper and more thoughtful plan around protecting your business, protecting your applications, and just making sure that you have the systems in place to keep your business continuously running. Right? I mean, in the old days, years and years ago, people could have gotten away with their website being down for a day. And that kind of stuff happened, remember? In the old days?
Yep.
Obviously, that can never happen now. You can never have your website or some other digital function within your business completely offline. So I think it's just sort of switching the thinking to what does it take for my business and my company to be continuously running and available to customers to serve their needs. So I think they measure risk in that way. It's a shift from nice to have to must have. And I would say that shift happened probably even 5 or 6 years ago. Right? To must have, must be on, always available. We are never going to let our business, go down. And so that requires some more sophisticated planning.
So if we it's really hard today to do this because marketing rides on a backbone of tech, right? But if we kind of just think about it more operationally and philosophically, what have you learned as a CMO in helping customers grapple with these issues that we've just been discussing? And how do you then apply that into your world of marketing, right? So, for example, a long time ago when I was just trying to figure out analytics and all this kind of stuff, I would go sit in the customer experience areas of HP or BMC or whatever and listen to CIOs talk about what I recognized were actually a lot of the same issues that I had as a communications leader or as a marketing leader. And I listened to how they solved their problems and kind of stole some of those ideas and applied them to marketing. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. How do you think about that as a CMO today?
Well, you and I have talked about this before, but for me, like a pivot in thinking that really, really made a big difference in my career and how I view marketing is really understanding that CMOs are investment managers, right? We are taking the marketing funds available in a company, and we are figuring out and giving advice back to our senior management on how to spend that for the best return on investment. And so within that, whenever you're starting to look at something as an investment, well, then obviously you want to measure the risk. But then you have the added complexity of, hey, we need to be trying some new things. And we're not going to be able to accurately assess the risk of every single marketing activity that we go into. And I think for me, a couple of things. One, shifting the way that I talk about marketing with my team in terms of, what's the ROI? What's the risk assessment? Using the terminology of an investment manager has helped just to reframe how we look at it as a team in a really, really, really positive way. But then also saying and working, with senior management, not just in the company I'm currently in, but in all the companies I've worked in, to understand risk. Hey, we're going to go try this thing. It's pretty risky. There's a 50% or greater chance that it may or may not develop anything, but we feel like we need to give it a shot. Or we're going to earmark a portion of our marketing budget and spend to try new things that may or may not. These are going to be kind of things we're investing in, just as you would look at that in an investment portfolio. And having that language and that sort of thought process has been really, really helpful to me, to my team, to the people I work with, and to the people that are funding it and measuring what we do. So within that, we're always looking at risk, right? What is the risk? How can we mitigate the risk? And a lot of times in marketing, it's about putting an activity or an idea into a laboratory and testing it first and gaining sort of confidence as you go, the way that you would do with any sort of risk in your life or in business.
Yeah, I obviously really agree with that. Let me ask you this question: Are there risks that you, based on your experience, your learnings, what are the greatest risks to a marketer or a marketing program? Like, what do you really like? If you're going to stack rank risk, right? What's at the top, and how does it flow?
I mean, I think that obviously the number one risk is that you're going to burn money and effort in areas that are not helpful to the bottom line, right? So that's sort of number one. Number two, the second greatest risk is that you're going to make mistakes that will hurt the reputation of the company that you're working with, or hurt their brand awareness or perception, right? That you might dilute the brand by engaging in too many things that are risky and unhelpful, or that you'll just sort of lose focus away from the focus, in terms of moving the company forward, in terms of forward progression. It's easy to lose focus. And then the last thing that I might mention in my list is being able to, even when you've got a great marketing plan and a great strategy and a great message, what happens in, all teams is that as it goes into the 10 million different places that you put it in, right, into social media and digital advertising and email and webinars and all the different things that you're placing this message into, that it begins to degrade. For me, that's something I really pay a lot of attention to, and it's, for me, one of the greatest challenges is how do you take a team of folks who are making judgment calls on your strategy and your message and how to translate that in to 10 million different places and maintain the quality of that and maintain the quality of message and make sure the intent of your message stays the same. And that's also a challenge that I relish trying to solve. It's a problem that I love to try to figure out. So, but I've been in organizations before where I've joined and they were focused on awareness over driving value to the sales bottom line. And I find that when you focus on that too much, you get too far away from the core mission of the company, right? Everybody's in business to try to move forward, to try to progress the mission of the company and to grow. And when you get too far away from that, then you lose focus. And so I think that's actually one of the biggest risks, is getting too far away from what actually drives sales. And I've also found that when you go into organizations and just sort of tweak that a little bit, get everybody focused back on how a deal actually gets done in a company, it's amazing, how quickly you can realign what's happening in any marketing environment.
Do you think about, so this goes back to the whole investment portfolio statement, right? Do you think about your marketing investments in light of different time horizons that you're expecting them to pay off?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Different time horizons. And I should say, just as a caveat to this whole conversation, I've really been lucky in that every company that I worked in, from BMC to VirtuStream, which was a Dell EMC Technologies company, to Island, I've always been really lucky to have senior managers who were interested in not only helping the sales team, but also in furthering the mission of the company. So they were willing to devote marketing resources and effort to things that were right for society, right for our teams, in addition to having a focus on the bottom line, right? So when those are kind of in place, then you're really kind of free to go back and think about the bottom line and how you're going to position your team and your resources to the right things. But yes, we do think about things in different and I bring that up because it's not just about timing, right? A short and long-term investment, but it's also about what are the types of things that you're investing in and what are your expectations around it, right? So like I said in the beginning, you might go into something and say, this may not really be a profit-bearing exercise, but it's the right thing to do. Or it may not be a profit-bearing exercise, but it brings awareness and it helps our teams or our corporate reputation or whatever it is that we're working on. So it's dividing them into those different buckets. And I have found in my own experience at working with senior leadership, when you can put it into those buckets and say, hey, we're going to do this event, and it's probably not going to generate any revenue, but it's about X, Y, or Z goal, everybody can really get on board with that and understand it. And yes, there are short-term and long-term, and really understanding, how long does it take you after you've planted that initial seed of getting a contact and getting to know someone to generate a relationship with them. And for me, I think that's kind of what I try to specialize in as a marketing leader is long-term relationships, right? We're going to have a relationship with this customer for many years if we do it right. And so what does that look like? Well, it's value-added communication so that we're not just constantly trying to sell at people, but that we're developing a meaningful engagement in the events that we do, in the communications we send out, in the way that we interact, that it's not just what's good for us, but what's good for the relationship and for our customers.
So realizing that for a lot of people, this is more of a gut thing than an analytical thing, but if someone were to talk to you and ask you a question about how long should I wait to see if it's working before I cut it off, right? How would you answer that question? I mean, it's sort of like the decision that some people had last week to get out of a really major company as investors, right? Yeah. They felt like that they had gotten in, that they had given it the good old college try, and that according to their time schedule, right, it hadn't worked out, and so there was some big, huge trades on this one company last week. How would you answer that question if another CMO was sitting across the table from you and said, "How do I know? Like, how long do I let the thread out, right, before I go? No, I'm yanking it back now."
Well, I think, there's no one good answer to that, but it really gets down to, and this is why when people get to the CMO level, they generally are going to stay in one industry, because by that time you've got, usually around 20 years of experience in that industry, and you've kind of seen a large gamut of things that have been tried. So you have a sense of how that will play out. And then the other piece of it too, which I can't overstress, is that CMOs have got to understand the fundamentals of the business. And so, because otherwise, how can you call the ball? How can you call the ball on how something's going to play out if you don't, do you understand the average sales cycle? How long is it? What are and even if you understand it, does it marry back to the corporate goals, or is the company shifting positions? Do you understand all the different pieces? One of the things that was great for me personally, this actually changed my career, and you were a part of it, was when I was at BMC and was working in public relations with you, we did the earnings releases. And in that, we really had to understand the fundamentals of how that business ran. And that was a real eye-opening experience for me. And, it was great. I have a natural curiosity for these things. So for me, that's sort of the fun part, is digging in and understanding the business. But when you have all that information, right, I understand how this business runs. I understand the revenue. I understand where we think the upside potential is in this business. Then you can start to call the ball. And when you combine that with 20 something years of experience of seeing a lot of different activities, we know that in the tech industry, A activity always works. Then you can have a sense of like, hey, I'm going to let this thing go a little bit longer. I'm going to keep going because I know it'll eventually pay off, etc. So one of the new things that we've had to sort of really think through in terms of that, in terms of like how long we're going to play at it, is the concept of account-based marketing. Everybody's an account-based marketing expert, but everybody has a different opinion on what that is. But really getting in and trying to look at what strategic accounts should be, where your sweet spot is. That was a marketing practice that takes a lot of patience. I will say though, it is really paid off, right? Like that's a new way of looking at marketing, right? The old way, or the adjoining way, is I'm going to cast a really big net. And that was kind of like how we did it in the old days. We were constantly casting a big net. Now we're still doing all of that, but we've added to it that we're going to do a tremendous amount of account-based research. And that's the kind of work that you do hand in hand, painstakingly with sales. And it takes a long time. It took a long time when we first started working in that arena to make it work. But when it does, right, it's 100% worth it.
I would guess that you basically took a subset of your accounts that were strategic or whatever, right? And so you kind of created you segregated your list, and some of them get the ABM and some of them don't, right?
Well, and I think too, it's like identifying new accounts that you can go after that match the sweet spot or your ideal customer profile. So, 15 years ago when we were doing this kind of stuff, you would make your ideal customer profile, and then you would create like this little person from it, and then you would create like emails where you were guessing about how you should write to Bob, your customer. And now, like, I'm glad that's behind us because we were just guessing. But now you're actually going to go out and find 100 Bobs. And you're going to put together the marketing and the messaging and the approach to that company that really fits them. But like that's based on having an ideal customer profile that is way more sophisticated than anything we were doing back in the days, years ago, when we were just trying to like write fun emails that would make Bob happy.
Yeah, one of the things, obviously we didn't realize it at the time. It certainly didn't have a name. But when I was one of the 4 global leads at HP before I knew you. And in public sector health and ed, that was one of my roles for a while. We worked with sales teams on certain strategic accounts. Could be the IRS, could be, whatever, U.S. Postal Service. And we discovered all the ways that the decision makers actually got their information. And most of the time, it actually wasn't what you thought it was.
Yeah.
So there were actually a lot of like agency newsletters and things like this that technically you weren't supposed to be able to pitch a story into. And so we had to kind of like work it a little differently. But it was all about not only presenting a particular point of view, but building cohesion around between all of the decision makers within an agency relative to this big honking decision that they were getting ready to make that obviously you wanted a part of. And so even though we didn't realize it at the time, it was really account-based communications is what it really was, right? And it was very effective. It worked great.
Yeah, doing that kind of deep research, really working to look in across your existing customers and look across what you're doing and who that ideal customer is and building out, new profiles, understanding what they care about. To your point, like where are they from a risk standpoint technologically? That's one aspect of what we might look at. Doing that, like that kind of stuff gets me out of bed in the morning, right? Because it's so wonderful to be able to understand these companies better, to understand our customers better, and to know them at that level. So, even though that was a very long tail marketing investment when ABM really became a thing, it's paid off. And you just sort of, in that sense, did we have a lot of historical data to prove that that was going to really be the thing? No, but I think in our guts we knew that because we were getting so much closer to the customer that it was the right way to go.
All right, so I got one last question for you. It's more personal.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And it kind of goes to the way that people prioritize, longer cycle versus shorter cycle and all this kind of stuff, right? When you think about yourself as a parent, as a friend, as a member of the community, how do you think of yourself as adding value? What is your intention around adding value across different time horizons? And how do you understand as a parent, for example, because you could argue there's some comparisons here between what you do for a living and that, right? How do you know that you've been successful before it's obvious that you've been successful?
Well, I think it's kind of like what we talked, for me, I think, and obviously this is a personal answer, all of these answers are based on just my experience, but it's about doing the research again, because, what we tend to do, I think, as adults is parent our children in the way that we always dreamed of being parented, right? My mom never let me have sodas in the house, so therefore there's a refrigerator full of sodas, right? We try to fill the gap.
That's a great one. That's awesome.
In our own lives, right? What we really wanted and what we dreamed of. And then there's that moment as a parent, and right now I have 2 adult children. I have an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old, where you realize, I need to figure out what this person needs, what this person values, what my child really, what would mean something to them. I'm really good at supplying them with things that fill the holes in my own heart, but that's obviously not a hole in their heart. I don't think my children are sitting around crying about sodas in the fridge. And when we were growing up, right, our parents we didn't get to have a soda. There was tabs in the fridge, and you better not touch them, right? So that was something that I wanted growing up, was just to have some cool things to give them to my friends. But for me and my kids, a good example of that is they really, really, really wanted a dog, and I thought I was not a dog person at all. But they just kept revisiting the topic. And so I had to listen to them and figure out, I know what I wanted as a kid. It's not what they want. What they want is a dog. So we ended up buying a dog, and it really met every hope and dream I could have ever had. I was super reluctant to do it. But it brought out a side of my kids that was just so wonderful to see, the empathy and the caring and the all those attributes that you really would love to see in your own children, right? And then of course we ended up getting another dog because that was such a great experience. So, I think it's about trying to meet people where they are, number one, and number two, give them what they really want. What do they value?
Yeah. There's great, profound truth there, right? There's a well-known book where the opening line is, "It's not about you."
Yes.
Right. And I think that is arguably the hardest thing for any of us to learn, and inarguably the most important.
Yes, it is, and it's sort of something you have to keep relearning.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's me. I own that comment.
Yeah, wake up and say, it's not about me.
Yeah, no.
The people around me. I will say this, through my working career, I've run into some individuals that were so just respectful. And I can't ever say enough good things about the founders of Island. They're wonderful people. And, I noticed when I started to work with them and other people from other companies that there was this kind of cadence of respectful language where they always kind of gave the other person the benefit of the doubt, right? Like, you may have already done this, but what's the status on this? Or, just try to always give people the benefit of the doubt in their explicit language.
Right.
And that was such a powerful tool once I saw that and started to copy it in terms of working with people and helping people to be more productive and to help people to bring value to what they were doing. Just that simple act of just really affecting a respectful tone that assumed that everybody was out to do the right thing. And, I came up in business in the 90s and 2000s, right? We were all in there together, and that wasn't necessarily the tone of business in those days. But that change, it's amazing. And it really changed how people respond to me as a leader. And I'm, of course, super grateful to the leaders that I had that sort of taught me that.
Yeah. No, flipping it back for just a second back into marketing, right? I think that the biggest mistake that I see, and I have made it myself. So, this is, see all those pointing back at me. Is talking about what I thought was important and what I wanted to talk about and what I thought the upside was and all this kind of stuff, as opposed to talking about what the other folks in the room, metaphorically and literally, wanted to talk about. And in so many instances, our audiences they're captivated, as a lot of people are. They're captivated with messaging about new, cool upsides and all this kind of stuff. But particularly when it's related to work, they are obsessed, and that is not an overstatement, with risk, right?
Yep.
With fear. I just did a survey over the weekend on LinkedIn, and I got the idea for it just because I was watching other people's surveys and what was going on, and there were all these people viewing the survey. There were a very, very small percentage of those who were actually responding to the survey. And yet there was kind of in between those 2 points were a bunch of people who were more than happy to comment below.
Yeah.
Right. On other aspects of this whole thing, and yet who still didn't vote.
Right.
Which was sort of also like watching the American political scene in miniature. Right.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, right. And one of the things, so I did this survey and I said, hey, why do you do this? Okay. Now I had to pick some choices. And the first one was, lack of trust. And the second one was something else. And I can't remember what they all were now. But I said, comment, just tell me. You don't need to pick one. And got lots of response to it. And it all boiled down to, I don't trust most of the people who are sponsoring these surveys.
Interesting.
Right? And so then I drill down into that, and they're like, so this is a platform. Everything that happens on this platform is being tracked and it's being collected somewhere. And if I say the wrong thing, somewhere somebody is going to use that against me in a hiring decision or something like that, right? And I was like, geez, man, and I'm not passing a judgment on whether it's right or wrong. I'm just commenting on how intense this feeling was. And so one of the things that I've started to really do is speak into that.
Yeah, I mean, and think about it, right? In terms of trust is one of the most valuable things that any kind of company or individual can possess in today's world, right? Like they can't go check you out at your place of business anymore. They can't, find all of the physical remnants of you. All they can find is your digital profile. And so trust as a part of a brand for a company or for an individual is, some of the highest currency we have in today's society. And how do you establish that trust, within your sphere as a person or as a company? It's a huge question, and it's super important to figure out, what are those pieces that will help people to trust you, right? And
In a really interesting sort of way, right? Your whole premise, right, at Island is trust based, right?
absolutely, and that's something that we take super seriously. Island has compliance officers on staff, which is sort of a differentiator for cloud companies because that's how seriously we take it. And it's a huge thing. It's something that we're constantly talking about, and earning our customers' trust and keeping their trust is incredibly important. And that helps me to learn as an individual, right? As being in this business where that's so important. How do you establish that? And you and I dealt with that at BMC, right? We went to the analyst community and showed them the different aspects of the company in order to get their endorsement to build trust, right? There's all sorts of ways that we build trust, and being attentive to that has taken up a lot of both of our careers. But right, it's been a fun pursuit to learn what that means.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Great conversation.
Yes, I enjoyed it. Thank you.